Sorry.
All right, so one of the things that we have kind of been talking about is how everything kind of, when you look at St. Thomas especially, and the philosophy of the church, how it all kind of builds upon and keeps, it all just fits together, right? It's not pieced together like you see a lot of modern philosophy. So what we're going to do today is kind of move along, but you're going to see how we keep repeating stuff we've already talked about, going a little deeper, and we're going to go. We're going to now sort of look at, like, philosophy, right, is about what's outside of us, right, like conforming our thoughts to reality. But today we're going to kind of stop and we're going to look at our thoughts themselves, right, and begin to kind of see how we learn, how we grow in knowledge, how we understand, and all those things. So what I want to do is kind of just start where we left off last week. All right, you guys remember this was where we were talking about the natural law, and we said, okay, well, remember a lot of what we talk about with philosophy, right, is first principles, learning first principles. And we said, okay, where do we get the first principles of natural law from? One of you guys want to kind of summarize what we talked about? I'm going to give you a little cheat sheet.
Natural law is to act so as to preserve the basic human goods.
Okay. So, to preserve the basic human goods. So, where do we get those basic human goods from? Is it because Rob said so, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean...
That's because you just look up to me so much.
I mean,
what about everybody else?
Ultimately, like, the truth comes from God, all of it, so... But, I mean, it just makes sense. I mean, I guess, like you said, we have to start somewhere, so why don't we start with something that...
Yeah, so would you guys say that these are...
self-evident.
Okay, that was the word I was looking for. Everyone understand what self-evident means when we use that term? So would you say these are self-evident? Go ahead.
I think they're self-evident. I think people could debate the order of them.
Okay. All right, so you guys remember how we ordered them too, right? And St. Thomas he never explicitly says there's an ordering to them, but we can see why there would be an ordering, right? So when you said people, did you mean Casey? Could they, like...
I mean, I could, but I think others would be more strenuous than I.
All right, so if you had to flip them, what would you, like...
I mean, I could see someone saying preservation of its own being is the highest human good, like it is our greatest desire to exist, and therefore, we would be willing to sacrifice anything for our own existence.
Okay. Go ahead, Jason.
Can we clarify what self-evident means? Because I don't... At the very least, number 2. I don't think number 2 is...
Okay, so self-evident simply just means that once you know the definition of the terms being used, that it necessarily means it's true.
Okay.
Okay. And so if I were trying to... So I've had this conversation with someone, right? If I were trying to ask someone, if someone were to say to me, hey, that to me is not self-evident, right? What is the strongest desire of human beings we have?
Sex.
Say sexual desire, right? Why? So desires always have something to fulfillment, right? Always have an object by which they're fulfilled. What is the object of sexual desire?
I mean, reproduction from a natural perspective.
Okay.
And union with the other.
Okay. What if I said vocation? What if I said it points to a vocation?
I mean, I think you can argue that because...
Don't think of vocation in terms of, like, a supernatural vocation. Think of, like, this natural movement towards what would ultimately fulfill us.
I mean, it's a movement outside yourself. So it helps you kind of take the leap of making a gift of yourself. And it's only once you do that you experience, who you're really meant to be, or closer to that. And so since it drives you outside of yourself, rightly formed, it will lead you.
Yes, but why is it the strongest desire, though? Have you ever thought about that? Why is it the strongest desire?
Because if it wasn't, we might give it up for other stronger desires.
Yeah, because it's precisely because it's not clear a lot of times that that's what we're supposed to do with it. So it's so deeply tied to vocation, to what will fulfill us. Like, think vocation in that term, not necessarily in the call, but what will ultimately fulfill us, that God has made it so powerful that we're naturally drawn to that, right? So I've had that conversation with someone before.
How'd it go?
I don't know. You'd have to probably just ask them. I don't know. I don't usually go back and get it. Like have them fill out a survey. How was your conversation with Rob today?
On a scale of 1 to 10.
Was he pleasant and amiable?
Would you
Probably not.
Here's like a devil's advocate sort of question. So, like it makes sense to me that we start with these and these make sense, and then we build our entire infrastructure upon them, and anything that goes against them we throw out, or it's messed up some way. That makes sense, but why are we starting with these 4 and not 4 other ones?
Okay, so that is actually a great question. Not really, but that's a good kind of launching point for a question. So I'm going to let Casey ask this question because I'm going to just build off your question and keep going.
So, from another person's perspective, again, so I'm not just continuing to about this, they might say, so yes, as creatures are urges to reproduce and create offspring, and furthermore to help those offspring to survive, so that kind of pushes to the marriage and beyond that, to procreation, but beyond that to marriage and family, because taking care of your young, like humans are incredibly bad at surviving on their own for the first 22 years of our lives.
My experience is at least 19 years.
But I guess your response to that would be like, that's naturally good because it is also...
Yeah, that's why it is the way it is, right? And so ultimately, like marriage, the purpose of marriage is to tie a father to his children. All right? In other words, through the mother, to tie a father to his children. Because otherwise there's no tie, right? So, if a child was fully mature in a year, then you'd have a lot of trouble making an argument for permanence in marriage, right? All right, so going back to what Kevin said. So what I want to do is for us to sort of focus on the last one today. Yes.
So if you're saying if it was, let's say the child can mature within a year, and let's to say the marriage can't be dissolved after the children have all grown up in 18 years.
So it's not just for that, right?
Yeah, but if you're making more of a purely biological basis for it, is there any answer beyond that?
So just on a biological level, no. Right? But on a personal level, for sure, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's ultimately the bond that actually secures the child, right? Like think about, not to get us off too far on a tangent, but think about what, if any of you have come from divorced families, you could probably relate to this, but one of the first things that children always do is they're like, what did I do wrong, right? Because all of their stability sits on the stability of the relationship with their parents. So strictly biologically speaking, there's not really an argument that can be made, but on a personal level, for sure. All right, so back to Kevin's point. So what I want to do, so these are all 4 of these. We all agree that when these are preserved, protected, promoted, that people thrive, right? Like so, if I lived my life based on keeping all of these, and we'll even say in this order, I would live a fulfilled life, and we get them from the fact that we look at ourselves. And we say, okay, what is actually good for human beings? Yes, Casey.
I just wanted to clarify for anyone who wasn't here last week that the order is not 1, 2, 3, 4, but like the highest being knowledge.
Yeah, it's simplest to most complex in the sense that the 4th is the most distinctly human, right? All right. So let's look at number 4. Now, if you guys remember what a PowerPoint idiot I am, right? So this is really stretching.
Have you used any sound effects?
Wait, you can do sound effects?
Uh-huh.
Well, I can't help.
Hey, how about this? How about I'll go back and you just make it with your mouth?
For 5 years we've used this background.
I know.
Shut up, Casey. Hey, you know what? Today's the last day. Let's go with some other generic background. I want you all to be comfortable. Like, doesn't that make you come in? You go like, I'm in life. It's that ugly plaid side background again. I don't even know what you call that. It's not plaid. I don't know what that is.
Unimpressive transition.
Okay. So Casey, look at that. You want to take a picture of it? Next time, totally different. Thanks.
Sure.
All right. So here it comes. Ready? All right. All right. So here we go. All right. So So all of these things, right? These natural goods for us map up to our desires, right? Things, and so the most distinctly human desire is to know, all right? And so then the pursuit of knowledge is our highest good, right? Everyone agree? Okay. So then we should probably step back and kind of learn how we learn, okay? So I'm just kind of setting up why this. So if I told you, if you guys were outside, like talking to friends, and go, I gotta go listen to a talk on epistemology. Like, okay. So I want to sort of set up why this is important. Okay. All right. So let's define our terms, and we'll play the philosophical game again, where we have to talk about the material and formal objects. So the definition is philosophical science that investigates the nature of human knowledge through its causes, so as to regard its trustworthiness. All right. What's the material object? What is the matter that we're studying? What is the thing we're looking at?
The nature of human knowledge.
Yeah, human knowledge, right? And then what is the formal object? How are we studying it? We want to see how reliable it is, right? It's trustworthiness. Like, that is the most important. Like, if I'm sitting here thinking about stuff, and fundamentally it's like you can't get in touch with reality, you don't know what's true, what's not, what's the point, right? So we want to know how trustworthy it is. And then if we know it's trustworthy, then how best to use it, okay? All right. So then we want to find out what the causes of it are, right? Like any science. And then it's based upon, what is it always based upon? That I didn't put up there? What is every science based upon? First principles? All right. So let's talk about what the first principles are, okay? And you're going to have seen these. You're going to see these. Have seen these already once, all right? So these are the first principles. So again, why do we use the term? Why do we have to have first principles?
Because we need axioms to build off.
Yeah, so these things are unquestionable, right? Because these are our assumptions that we're going to make moving forward. And is there anything wrong with making assumptions?
No.
Because a lot of times people will say, okay, well, you're making all these assumptions, right? And so these are the assumptions upon which all of our thought are based, all right? So this is just our sort of our intellectual foundation. And remember, we saw these when we did the philosophy of nature. So the first one is the principle of identity. And we'll talk about an example in a second. Each being is what it is and not another. The principle of contradiction. Nothing can be both affirmed and denied at the same subject at the same time in the same respect. Principle of excluded middle. A thing exists or it does not exist. Everything that is, insofar as it is, has a sufficient reason for its being. All right. So those are all of our first principles. So let's look at an example. So since Casey picked on my slides, so little 1-year-old Casey is really cranky, and he wants his blankie. Okay, and his mom doesn't know where his blankie is, so she gives him some other blanket. All right, and he starts crying. All right, and so what does he know? What is he learning?
Each being is what it is and not another.
Yeah, so he's like, okay, that's not my blankie. All right.
Please keep this train going.
Yeah. All right, we'll see what we can do. All right, so then he doesn't want that blankie, all right? But he's like, well, I kind of like this blankie, but I really want the other blankie, all right? So this can't be my blankie and not be my blankie, all right? So it can't both be and not be my blankie. Yes.
Is he going to be our replacement for the chair for the rest of the semester?
No, just for today.
Just for today.
Slide. Actually, maybe just for the slide. Depends. If he comes in with a blankie next week.
All that's
I mean, my baby blanket's at home.
Are you going to be home for fall break?
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Well, that's my list.
So,
You can hand him his baby
what
blanket.
about
That is not his blankie.
what about like the Schrodinger's cat model for quantum realities or quantum phenomena, quantum computing?
Hey, so talk more about what that is.
So I guess the idea is like, and I don't know clearly doesn't go against this, but it's kind of like, it kind of has the danger of seeming like it does, because it's like, the qubit or something is in one position, the other position, or both at the same time. And I think what they really mean is they don't know which one it's in.
Yeah.
But, I don't know,
I think you just
wanted to
answered the
look
question, right?
yeah.
Because I feel like you could say the same thing when you talk about like light, when it's like we don't like you're like wave and particle, but it's like it is something, even if we don't really understand exactly how it operates. Right? And maybe I'm not a physicist, so I can't say.
Yeah, I'm not either, but it seems like you answered the question, right? It's that we just when something is unknown, or you're not. So if it appears that it's in the same place, if it's in two different places, you're not measuring correctly, right? And that's just a shortage of, because this is again first principle stuff we can't question, right? All right, so it can't both be his blankie and not his blankie. But so he doesn't have it, so he gives it back, and he's still cranky and still wants his blankie, right? Why does he want his blankie? Because he knows it exists, right? He knows it's actually out there somewhere. All right. And then this is really becoming a stretch now. See if I can go all four of them. So the principle of sufficient reason. So he's cranky about his blankie. I didn't realize that actually rhymed until I said that. So I've got the alliteration going on now. I'm hoping this is searing into people's memory for that, so that when they look at those, when I come back to the same slides, they think of you standing beside them with a blanket.
Okay. I'm going to share this with my mother.
Yeah.
What she says.
Touching the blankie.
All right, so everything that is, insofar as it is, has a sufficient reason for its being. So it's not just enough for him to be cranky. He knows it just doesn't poof into his hands when he feels cranky. What does he do? He cries, right? So he's like, the cause of my blanket materializing in my hands is crying, right? And he cries a lot, right? So it has a reason.
When I cry, I get what I want.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's valuable. Yes.
Is God bound by the principle of sufficient reason?
Yes.
Okay.
So all of these things are principles of reality, like things that, like, to contradict this would be, say, like a square circle. It's the same, like, these are metaphysical realities, of which just the way that reality is.
Okay.
So don't think in terms of, like, be careful of thinking like terms of him being bound by it, because that language, I know what you mean, but that language seems to suggest that God is, like, you can get into like the, is a thing good because God commands it, or is it good because, or does God command it because it's good?
Right.
It's both, right?
So God will never, is it better to say God will never violate those laws?
Yeah, but that's the way God operates.
He can't violate them in the same way that he can't make a square circle.
Yeah, it's just the way he operates.
Logically contradicts.
Right, he always operates in this way.
So
it's of his nature to operate like this.
One of the arguments I've heard from Father Ripperger against the idea of theistic evolution, for example, is that if you grant only microevolution and not macroevolution, and you put God into like the gap in the fossil record every single time that there exists one, you're violating the principle of sufficient reason. Is that a valid argument?
Violate the principle of sufficient reason by
basically Father Ripperger's
so like the God in the gaps.
Right. He's saying it doesn't make as much sense because based on the principle of sufficient reason, why would God intervene in the development of life as they see it via multiple miracles instead of just creating life as a single miracle at the very beginning, as it is?
So that's his argument is just one, or is that the argument against?
The argument is that there will be sufficient reason for him creating life the very first time, and then allowing everything to like speciate out, but it violates the principle of sufficient reason for him to jump in the missing fossil records and like put a miracle to advance the development of life at every place that.
Yeah, so I think when we talked about this, sort of the argument we put forward was we looked at it in the terms of like matter and form, and that matter can't create form. So for each existent, wherever we draw a line between species, God had to create a new form because only He can be an efficient cause of a new form. So however we draw the line, between, is a penguin, just steps in microevolution to a duck. I don't know if that's true or not, but I have no idea. So this shows how how smart I am about biology. But we could definitely say that there's a difference in kind between ducks and apparently do not pound the thing because the poison. There's a difference in kind, and so to create a new form between humans and ducks, there would have to be God would have to intervene. Precisely for the principle of sufficient reason, because a duck can't give an immaterial, can't create an immaterial form.
That'd be a really special duck if it could.
Yes, not even Donald. All right, cool. All right,
So he does have notes.
we are struggling with. All right. Let's guys look at this again. This is where you say, wow. All right. So what I want to do then is start with this. All right. What were you going to say?
Actually, can you give another example for the last one again that does not revolve around casing in a blanket?
Yeah. Well, just think of it. Just think of an effect has to be contained within a cause. Like that's a corollary of it. So, what's an example of someone? So I have a glass here, and suddenly there's water in it. Like whatever your explanation of that, they had to have water to put it there. So in other words, like if I tried to empty it, put it from an empty pitcher, that would violate the principle of sufficient cause or sufficient reason.
Okay.
But if I had water, poured it in there, then I would be the material cause of it, or the efficient cause of it.
Okay. So it's kind of related to the conversion of matter principle in a sense.
Yeah, so a couple of steps forward, but yes, so this would be the first principle. That would be, yes?
This is the same thing as saying like every being is either dependent on another being for its own existence or dependent on himself for his own existence.
That would be a corollary of it as well.
Okay.
I mean, to go against that last one would sort of be that the principle of sufficient reason, or basically to start thinking that like life doesn't have any meaning, because like if water can randomly appear in a glass without meaning, then it's like what's the point of anything? Kind of like it starts to seems like
Yeah, I mean, it obviously, it has meaning because it has first principles, right? So if things are just going to randomly happen, then that are totally contrary to reason, then how would reason even tell you that life has a meaning? So in other words, it has to be, we'll talk a lot about this, about things being intelligible, so that means that they can be understood. And if things are just randomly popping up, there's no intelligibility. Okay.
How would a miracle fit into that?
Yeah, so a miracle would just depend on, we talked about this at one point, but it would depend upon the type of miracle it is. So we put them in categories. So we talked about like natural miracles, like Jesus turning water into wine, would be just Jesus himself as Lord of nature, speeding nature up, because water does turn into wine, like eventually, right? And then like him, his resurrection, right? Like God can intervene at any point, not to contradict nature, but to make it supernature, right? So that's where we get supernatural from. Does that make sense? What were you going to say?
I was going to ask if this principle is where love being like the base cause of everything comes into play with St. Thomas Aquinas, or not everything, just like feelings.
Human action,
yes.
He really does say love makes the world go round, right? Like it moves. Love is what moves us to do anything, right? Like we see something good, and we move towards it.
So that would follow in according to
this principle. This would be that would be applied to our actions, right? Okay. So the good is always what moves me, and a lack of good is always what repels me. All right. So let's go here. All right. So what I want to do is for us to connect these two dots. All right. So I think the first week we met this semester, somebody asked why we were doing this, right? And you remember what my answer was? The answer was because right action always follows right thought. Okay. And so that first thing up there from René Descartes, which we'll unpack in a second, if we trace the line down, we can find out. So if we talk about something like moral relativism is not a moral problem per se. It's an epistemological problem. Okay, and we'll find out that a lot of things are like that. So we're gonna start with that, and we're gonna end up at the second. So we'll start with I think, therefore I am, and then we'll end up at the famous Supreme Court Heart of Liberty statement in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is the enshrinement of relativism of all sorts as sort of the national dogma. Okay. All right. So how do we get there? All right. So remember what we talked about when we encounter an error. It's not just enough just to kind of refute the error. We've got to go to the roots of it, right, and dig down and then fix that, right? Because I'm, as we talked about, very convinced that things will not get better until people start thinking correctly. And people won't start thinking correctly until they meet St. Thomas Aquinas. Just saying. All right. All right, so here is what... so I suspect, and I only have one data point to prove this, but I suspect if you would take a philosophy course here, that as they were ordering things, and remember I talked about why we did the order the way we did it, right? Because... let's go back. Let's go back to Casey. So did Casey already know that each being is what it is and not another?
Are you saying could I tell, like...
Not in those terms.
Did he? Yeah, because we didn't know that. How did he learn it?
Observation.
Yeah, so encounter with the world, right? So it wasn't. He didn't look inside. You can see where I'm going to go with this, right? He didn't look inside and go, "Oh yeah, each being is what it is and not another." So there's no innate ideas that are just sort of implanted in his brain, and he just suddenly, right? But remember I said these are the sort of the rules of reality, the way reality is structured, so that when I encounter reality, because I have something that will allow me to interpret reality, I can intuit these laws. All right, and so Casey learned all of those things about his blankie because he had this encounter outside of himself. Okay, so completely blank, and then his encounter with reality, he begins to discover, because he has the tools of discovery, these principles hold. All right, no one ever taught him that a thing is what it is and not another. Okay, he just intuited it by encountering reality. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so if you were to take a philosophy course, I'd say very likely the ordering would be different, right? Why did I start with natural philosophy? Why did I go in the order that I did? Why is epistemology right before we finish with metaphysics? Anyone kind of understand why? Think about what he's saying, right? Where would Descartes start?
With epistemology.
That's what he's doing, right? So where would we start?
With the world.
Start outside, right? We'd start outside, because what's philosophy again? The love of wisdom. What is wisdom? The right ordering of things, right? So things have a natural order to them, and we discover what that order is. So I suspect if you took a philosophy course, epistemology would be on the front end of it. All right, and so here's why. Okay, so Descartes, I think, therefore I am. This is what he says in his first meditation. In this first knowledge, doubtless there is nothing that gives me assurance of its truth except the clear and distinct perception of what I affirm. And accordingly, it seems to me that I may now take as a general rule that all that is very clearly and distinctly apprehended is true. What is he saying? Let's try to sort of unpack what he's saying.
I mean, it sounds like he's saying that if it's obvious, then it's true.
There's no external force on whether it is true. It is true because I consider it to be true.
Yeah, say that again.
There's no external force which determines whether something's true or not.
So if something's, what is his rule for whether something's true or not?
He perceives it.
He perceives it to be clear and distinct. So he has a good idea of it. All right. So what is his mode and measure of truth?
Who's on mine?
Clarity in his mind. Right. What is the real way in which we discern truth?
Core of reality.
Yeah. What is truth again? Say it again, Casey. What's the definition of truth?
Conforming one's mind to reality.
Yeah, conforming ideas or thoughts with reality. Right. Okay.
But our perception of reality is skewed though by ourselves.
Okay. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, right?
Okay.
But skewed. But is there actually something outside of us? Like, so in other words, is there something that's skewed, or do we just naturally skew it, or is there nothing to be skewed and everything is inside? So that's like the sort of the three choices.
Can I ask a question about that, or are we gonna? Okay, so like, I think the perfect example would be color. Like, we perceive colors slightly differently. Like, that's like not color blindness, but like everyone looks at that wall and says it's red, but it's or my baby blanket. Everyone looks at my baby blanket and says it's a different, like perceives a slightly different shade. How like does that mean there is a correct shade, and some people's minds is in less accord with that reality, or is it?
Yeah. So there is absolutely an objective shade to the wall, right? But just because we can't perceive it correctly, or we perceive it, that's just a commentary on our senses, and as we'll see, our ability to perceive things, and our imagination, and even our mode of thinking, right? But it doesn't. It still starts with, all of us may say that's red, but maybe I don't even know what shades of red. Like don't ask. I'm not Sherwin-Williams. Like, I don't know what shade of red actually is, right? Yeah, and we may disagree what shade that actually is, but that is because of a lack of precision, right? Rather than a lack of objective reality. So our measurement, our measuring tool or stick isn't precise enough.
And then another example would be like in a court case, if you have witnesses, like if they're all recounting the same event, like just by the way we observe things, like everyone's version or recounting of it would be slightly different.
Yeah, so I want to come back to that because that's like a really important point about what we're going to talk about. Okay. Yes.
So going along with like what he said with vision, I guess the way you could think about it more clearly is like people with glasses, right? Like there is objectively like a certain level of acuteness that you can visualize or not visualize something depending on how good your retina is in shape or whatever. Or even like humans only have humans have a limited capacity to see things. Like our vision up close to something is going to be different from that of like an ant, which is able to like get closer, or God, which can see.
Or an eagle, or
like we're not going to say that since I can't see like the molecular composition of this table, that it, therefore it's not there. So I guess what you're saying, like, it has to do with a degree of acuity. But if you're going to pull up like the vision argument, then that's what I would say. It's not going to be, okay, well, there is a prime number of like rods and cones you can have to perceive the correct shade of red.
But I guess my question would be, because I feel like you would hesitate to say the true redness is 564, whatever the measurement is, right? Because like that's what we talked about.
No, well, so I would say the true redness is not whatever I would say the true redness is like whatever. So the form, like the accidental form of the wall, is, let's just say, brick red. Just because it's a shade of red, I know it's not brick red, and that's the true form. And just like I would say, like this is a circle, but not perfect, right? Because perfect circle doesn't exist, right? But I can abstract the format of this to see a circle. Does that make sense? And I can do the same thing with the accidental form of the red on the wall. I mean, I have a name for it, but the fact that I can say that is a different red than my shirt says that I can compare forms. So I know it's a different form. I may not be able to tell you exactly what the form is. Does that make sense? Yes.
So I just want to poke at the logic here. So he's saying that...
we need to poke at this logic.
Yeah, so
we'll see how we got
Yeah,
to
but also at our reading of it. So he is saying that if it is very clearly and distinctly apprehended, then it is true. He is not saying that's the only set of things that are true? Does he say more things later on that gets into that point?
Well, so what he has to do later on is he has to begin to fill in gaps.
Yeah.
So he says, like, for instance, like, based on this, our senses really aren't a reliable source of information. So what he says is that, well, God wouldn't deceive us, so we can trust our senses. So where St. Thomas said, no, sense knowledge, he talked about sense knowledge being, of the level of certainty of first principles, and what he has to then make that as an assumption and come back to it. So he has to make a whole bunch of assumptions based on that. But that's his principle that then carries, that's what I want to, so when you only give a principle, right, whatever assumptions you make, people wipe away.
Yeah, I was just saying that he's saying if it's clearly and distinctly apprehended, then it's true. And we took that to say that the only things that are true are those that are very clearly and distinctly apprehended.
Yeah, he doesn't say
that's
that.
not what he says.
He doesn't say
Okay.
that. But then the people that follow him will.
Okay.
Right? So, because ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
And when he can't prove them anymore, when all he can do is, look, all I can prove is that I'm thinking and I have this clear and distinct idea of my thoughts, so therefore I exist. Okay, so he goes, then someone else comes along, connects the dots and said, oh, what he's saying is all things of which you have a clear and distinct idea exist.
Okay.
Right? Because that's the principle he applied. And then what's the problem with that? Is you just keep tracing down and reality then, like, truth, conformity, is only when I have clear and distinct ideas.
But so, like, maybe, something that would go against it is, like, your taste buds change. So it's like, I had some hummus today. I'm like, I actually kind of like hummus now. But, like, this past time.
Dude, you're getting old.
Get on an airplane and they're like, here's some hummus and pita. And it's like, what is this? So.
Wait, where are you flying that you're getting hummus?
American Airlines. They
give you hummus now.
Yeah.
Whatever. Anyways, so I guess I could say I have a clear and distinct perception. Maybe it's not clear and distinct, but it's getting close. Like I like hummus. But before I did think I very clearly and distinctly did not like hummus. So now is hummus changing?
No, because it does. That's his point.
It's not changing.
What changed?
Well,
your idea, right? Your idea of hummus.
Changing reality. That doesn't seem to make sense.
Of course, it doesn't make sense. That's the whole point, right? Like, we're not saying this is good, Ken.
I know. I'm just trying to
Yes.
see whether this is an accurate way to.
No, it's not. That's the whole point. Like, and that's what I want to do. I want to drag us to, because now, what were you going to say? Right.
He just answered the question that just for the record. He said, is that an accurate way to refute it? And you said no.
What is what an accurate?
His example would being an accurate.
No, that's not an accurate. We'll talk about why.
It's not.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
No, like.
Hummus on my baby blanket, I'm gonna be mad.
Yeah. We'll talk about how to refute it in a second. But I mean, the problem with that too is there's like it's not a good example because it's subjective anyway. Like your taste.
Yeah.
Like you got to get out of subjectivity to answer it anyway. And move to something more objective, right? Like that everyone would agree on, rather than hummus is good.
Yeah, like that was better than chocolate.
Yeah. No, I meant no. I really didn't mean that. I wasn't blowing you off. Go ahead, Ryan.
Earlier you had said that if I have a clear idea of it and I understand it, then it is reality. But doesn't that kind of fall apart when you come to something? It's in dragons, so it's a whole different discussion. But like for unicorns or leprechauns, where if I have a really clear idea of what a unicorn is, and I can tell you all sorts of stuff of what they eat, what they're like, what different parts of them do, I have a clear idea and full knowledge of it, but that doesn't mean it exists. Same thing for leprechauns.
Yeah, so Descartes, or really Locke or Kant after him, would say it does exist.
Just
because you have a clear and distinct idea.
It exists in your mind?
Yeah, well, so reality is in your mind, is in your ideas.
Okay.
Like, so read what Locke is saying. The mind, in all its thoughts and reasonings, has no other immediate object but its own ideas.
So it's like a mind palace.
Yeah, so you get trapped in your own thoughts and your own ideas.
So what is meant by true is not in any form universal. It is incredibly specific. So when you say, like, I have a clear idea of a unicorn, therefore it's true, I've never heard of a unicorn before, so I have no idea what she's talking about. So it's not true to me. Or it's not real to me. doesn't exist.
Keep going with that line of thought now. So that's the next step. So keep going with that. So what does that mean? You say unicorns don't exist.
Well, I mean,
she says they do.
Contradicts first principles because something cannot be and not be.
Okay, so we're getting to Kevin's question about how to refute it. So if I am the rule and measure of reality, my reality, and you are the rule and measure of your own reality, then we can say completely, and in fact, I may come to like hummus later, and I can my reality can contradict itself. All right. So now go back to what I was trying to connect. So now think about what the roots of moral relativism. What is moral relativism?
There's no objective truth.
There's no objective truth, right? Like, you guys live and swim in this, right? Like, it's actually, like, taught and assumed.
Yeah, that's gross.
That everyone's opinion matters, right? How many times have you heard that? There are no wrong opinions. Right? That's where it comes from. Yes, Casey.
But where this kind of gets weird, though, is because we don't believe in scientific relativism. So when it says the mind and all its thoughts and reasons have no other immediate object but its own ideas, someone would say, but we can know that the law of gravity is the truest truth that has ever been stated.
Yeah, but so now it becomes its livableness too, right? Like go to a moral relativist and grab his wallet and start running, and he's going to chase you, right? Because he's like, hey, that's my wallet, that's wrong. Like, give it back. So yeah, it's unlivable because it's untrue.
It's not like anyone would ever deny that there's only two sexes.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah. All right. So that's what so in other words, what it does is, I mean, philosophically, it's called the turn to the subject. Descartes turns interior, turns philosophy inside, so that now we are the measure of reality. Okay, what is true actually doesn't really matter. It's what I have a clear, distinct idea of. And this is why people will often say, they'll praise people. They'll say, well, I don't agree with him, but he's clearly very passionate about it, and you've got to give him credit for that. Well, no, it just means he maybe has a soft heart, but he's got a soft head too, right? Like, that's not a good reason, right? Yes, Casey.
Did Descartes really even intend this anyway? Or is it more like, I've now turned in on myself, so I know I exist, and once I can do that, I can say, okay, let me look at this earth.
Yeah.
Is it flat? Is it round? And then start to know the world once we know.
Yeah, this is the problem, right? Is so that, like, in his mind, what he's trying to do is he's trying to
start at ground zero.
Start at ground zero with no first principles. Mm-hmm. He's saying, okay, what if we doubt everything?
He's trying to he's trying to offer a new proof for the existence of God that nobody could possibly deny. Like, he's very arrogant in his introduction, saying, I'm going to offer this proof, and for once and for all the heretics and the atheists, they're going to be defeated.
Well,
you're welcome. I'll stay with me.
Yeah. And which he ultimately fails miserably at, because how do we prove the existence of God? And we'll talk about this in 3 or 4 weeks, whenever we get to it. But we're using what? What do we use?
Reason.
And
the world.
The world, right? So if now we question the world, how are we going to prove the existence of God? Okay, it's using reason, right? And that's why he tries to do the opposite. He says, well, God exists, and the world is reliable because he wouldn't trick us. So now he uses God to prove the existence of the world.
He wouldn't trick us, is it?
Apparently, but you can't get away from first principles, because at a certain point you have no ground to stand on, and you saw the limb underneath yourself, right? So you're like, I have nothing to stand on. Even he has first principles, right? Things that are unquestioned.
But real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
So Casey, because I think with that he was not trying to endorse relativism, but it was more of, it's not like saying what each person perceives, it's more like he was focused on just himself. Kind of like, would you say that's correct, Rob, at all?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying about ideas have consequences, right? That he had no idea what consequences.
Yeah.
And
then they took him.
He's just trying to offer up a thought experiment and say, okay, I don't believe this, but I'll just for the sake of the argument, let's say we can't trust our senses at all.
Right. But he also seems to be acting the assumption of he is hypothetically the only person in existence as well. because he's not like, okay, I know I exist, and now where do we go from there?
Right.
Because as far as he's concerned, like it could be no one else actually exists. So.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if your shower thought at 6 a.m. destabilized the next 300 years?
Poor Descartes. Yeah.
He did get the good truth.
Like, oh man.
In case you didn't have showers back then. Sorry.
He was standing in the rain.
Yeah. No, but so part of this, right? This is why, like, we can't make compromises with modern philosophy, right? Like, the way out of this is to go back to the church's perennial understanding of reality, right? Which worked, which explained it, which is in accord with common sense. We can't somehow take this and turn it around because it's thrown everything out. Yes, Casey.
Is there anyone you would point to that's not Aristotle or Aquinas that like is a because like I feel like
there's other people.
Oh my gosh.
The apostle too, I guess. But like because like so like you point to Aristotle and people think like yes, the guy who said it's natural for things to be on the ground. Like there's so many preconceived notions about Aristotle and Aquinas.
Yeah, he said a woman is a misbegotten male, right? Like
so.
I mean, like modern day Bishop Barron is like very good at giving Thomas Aquinas' arguments in ways that people can understand. There's lots of people that talk about these things, but you don't necessarily know where they're getting them from.
So I would say Bishop Barron is pretty good about it. I mean, you've kind of like hit the nail on the head as to why we're doing this, right? Like just to give you not language, like not this language, right? Because this is, I mean, I like Father Rippinger, but he doesn't have an ability to bring it down into like language that everyone understands. Like that's what I want to do. Like I want you guys to then understand this so that you can begin to talk to people about it in the language. Because if it's true, there has to be language that matches it, right? And so that's why we're. And if not, then we need to make sure that it's there, right? So I would say the sort of the best Thomas. Like modern day Thomas, Edward Phaser, in my mind, is by far the best.
Okay.
Father Rippinger is really good as long as you can read, and then you have to translate. Who else is good? Those would be the two that like immediately come to mind.
Is there anyone? So I guess my question was not fully explained. Even anyone who's not modern, like someone that someone might think of as
like another
reasonable,
kind of close.
Yeah, similar ideas that just aren't as many preconceived notions. Or
well, see, so a lot of it, like until you get to Descartes, like everyone left Aquinas alone. Like they're like, this is complete. It just now needs to be applied. So there weren't a lot of, and this was part of the problem that they didn't answer when Descartes came, right? Because people were like, no one's going to take that seriously, right? Until somebody came along and realized we can use this to cut the legs off the church, and then no, it was too late, right? So once the idea was out there, and then the Reformation happens, they can then use it because that's what ultimately that's why Aristotle got thrown out, was because they're like, oh look, he's backwards because his science is wrong, and Aquinas too, like he was backwards because he believed Aristotle.
But Aquinas didn't believe every single thing Aristotle ever said.
No, not at all. I mean, he quotes him, but he quotes Augustine far more, right, than he does.
He quotes the Bible far more than Augustine.
Yeah. Yes.
So what is the exact basis of the Protestant Reformation, like the philosophical basis for that?
Who can answer that, like, in less than a sentence, because we've already talked about this.
Oh, man. I wouldn't pass the test for this class.
All right, so the philosophical basis is what's called nominalism. Okay, and we can talk about it like another time, but it's just basically the fact that natures don't exist, and then so everything is an individual thing, and then once you have that, you can throw out things like sanctifying grace, the sacraments, the church, all those things go with that.
So there's no groupings. It's just
yeah. There. If you go to that the website I had there, I have articles on Protestantism and nominalism. Okay, all right. So even St. Thomas. So the other thing too is like you can always find, like I told you guys, this is very first class, like serious man crush on St. Thomas, but you can always find his like responses that are that are relevant to what we get into today.
Options that didn't exist yet.
Yeah. So he does talk about relatives, and he doesn't use that word. So here's what he says. Some have asserted that our intellectual faculties know, and I'm giving this whole quote, and we're going to unpack it pretty quickly, but just again, so that you guys begin to learn how to read these, right? Some have asserted that our intellectual faculties know only the impression made on them. All right? For example, that sense is cognizant only of the impression made on its own. According to this theory, the intellect understands only its own impression, right? So he's saying the same thing that Locke said at the bottom. Okay? Namely, the intelligible species which it has received, so that the species is what is understood. So when he says that intelligible species is the idea, okay? Is the form and the idea of it. So it's the idea that's understood and not the thing that the idea is pointing to. And he says this is manifestly false for two reasons. First, because the things we understand are the objects of science. Therefore, if what we understand is merely the intelligible species in the soul, it would follow that every science would be concerned with objects outside the soul, but only with the intelligible species within the soul. So somebody already said this. If this is really true, if we really live by this, empirical science has no place, right? Because reality, you can't know anything about reality. So he's just saying, what St. Thomas is saying is that because there's only one science that's left, and that's psychology, right? Which would explain why we have this obsession with psychology as a culture. Secondly, it is untrue because it would lead to the opinion that whatever seems is true. All right, this is everything we just talked about. Right, so he's already got it in there. And consequently, contradictories are true simultaneously. Unicorns both exist and do not exist. For if the faculty knows its own impression only, again, it knows only its idea, it can judge of that only. Now, a thing seems according to the impression made on the cognitive faculty. Okay, and then at the bottom it says, thus every opinion would be equally true. In fact, every sort of apprehension. All right, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Right, everyone's opinion matters, and everyone's opinion is equally true.
Well,
all right, so let's
for ours.
Yeah, except if I don't agree with you.
Right.
All right, so this will help just to kind of have a visual of what he's saying. Okay, so for St. Thomas, he would say, okay, here's our mind, and it has as its object. What's the object of our intellect? What does our intellect? What's it for? Why are we given an intellect?
Understand ideas.
Ooh, so JT said to understand ideas. What would you guys say to that?
I say to understand reality.
Yeah, so you just smote within a little Descartes when you said that. So we don't understand ideas, we understand reality using ideas. All right? Now, modern philosophy would say, which is down at the bottom, our minds are actually there so that we can understand our ideas. All right? And how that then relates to reality, each philosopher has a different theory. Okay?
But rarely does anyone say reality doesn't exist. Simply that we just can't know
I
reality.
don't know, you heard the Matrix argument?
Yes, but like...
Yeah, like, people say that. I mean...
There's a lot of people who say who are insistent there's no such thing as objective truth.
Well, yeah, they will... See, this is part of it. So people will say things like that, but they don't mean it.
But yeah, so most of the time when they say that, they mean they don't believe in objective morality, but they believe in objective.
Yeah, but their vote counts just as much as yours and mine. So,
Like,
they might not actually live out their beliefs, but I don't know.
The farthest I've gotten in a conversation with somebody like that ended up with, I don't want to find out if there is objective truth because it's easier the way I am. And that was when we ended.
Yeah, I mean, you can't dispute that, right?
I think the Matrix one is super hard because, like, when you say, like, people's mode of living doesn't correspond to how they view it, that one almost does. Because if you say I'm living in a Matrix, I desire happiness, therefore I'm going to pursue it, even if I'm in a Matrix. So that one's always hard to kind of...
Yeah.
There's this other one that's kind of interesting. It's, you know, I don't believe, and I don't think probably anybody or maybe a few people believe that we could, create a world as complex or beautiful or whatever, like our own, or, create a humanoid like ourselves. But we can maybe get close, and even close enough that we couldn't tell the difference. And so now, if I can create like a video game, Sims, for instance, and I can get it good enough, and someone puts on their VR glasses, they have no idea whether in this world or the fake one that the computer's producing. So now, why aren't we in a computer world? That's kind of like an argument.
Yeah, well, because it's true. Like that's the appeal, right? That's the appeal of VR. That's the appeal of because you can. I actually like me better when I'm, in this world, because I've made my own sort of reality around it, and like a lot of people escape to do that. But it's just. What were you going to say, JT? Were you going to say something? You don't have to. I'm just saying. Thought you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that if you smoke enough weed, anything makes sense.
Well, there's that too. but even like, this is what I was telling you guys about, like, and why I'm spending a little more time on this because it wasn't fair. Like when I said, like, I had no desire to, like, people who are either playing like thought experiments or so contrary to common sense. I just kind of shy away from that, right? Because I'm focused on reality as it really is. But in this case, like, this was so, like, so much at the base of so much of what's wrong with the world, and then we had to talk about it. And that's why we're spending so much time looking at the other side of it. Go ahead.
So, in slight defense of the Matrix theory, not because I think we're in the Matrix, but there is a
Because you love
relevance.
movies.
I mean, that too.
Movie night? Coming soon.
A man for all seasons.
All right, go ahead, before you lose
So-
your train of thought.
There is a relevance to the notion that, yes, everything we perceive could be entirely false. And so we are forced to act on the assumptions that this is, like, this table does really exist. You exist, I exist, etc. And so, to what extent does that create issues?
Yeah, so
Not
part
necessarily in
of,
terms of morality, but just in terms of perceiving reality.
yeah, part of the problem is like sense data, what we see and perceive. Like that's the first principle, right? I can't prove that this water bottle is sitting on the table. Like no amount of philosophical argument can I prove. But I could look at something like the contradiction of this. So, in the person who just knows, so if you're trapped, if what Descartes really says is true, right, and you're trapped only knowing your own ideas, where did any of your ideas come from?
Yourself.
Where did you get them from?
Prior sense.
So remember, Casey didn't know the law of contradiction until he met his blankie. So, and then he learned, and he was able to abstract, and he learned this principle by encountering reality. So where do those ideas come from?
Our experiences. But
Yeah. So this is why it's like it leads to a contradiction, right? I can prove that if you start talking like that, I can lead you to a contradiction.
But the thing is, your thoughts exist, but what the thoughts themselves are about could still be false. But that doesn't negate the fact that your thoughts exist.
Yeah, but
I'm
the
saying
fact
your
that you
mental
said that
work-
they're false
Right.
says that something that I'm not the judge of my own thoughts, right? What Descartes is saying is that you are the judge of your own thoughts, and it's clear, it's true, and there is really no false, right? You just don't have an idea about it.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way you can't prove this, like I can't prove I'm not in the Matrix, but I can prove if we're in the Matrix, how it would lead to a contradiction. But if you threw out the principle contradiction, then I can't prove it even that, right?
How
And
would
that's
like we're in a simulation of the Matrix, kind of. How would that lead to a contradiction?
well, where is so the people that are outside of it? I mean, where did they come from? Like who started the machine?
What does that matter?
Well, it would show that there's a reality outside of.
So you're saying even if our reality isn't true, then we can believe the reality that is true still has the God, still has everything about our reality that's true.
Yeah, because that's the Matrix, right? What he's still out.
It doesn't really make a big difference. Yeah, like to God.
So what if we are
That's why I told you I had like no tolerance because it's just a thought experiment meant to throw me off track, right? But if I follow it out, then reality still exists. Maybe it's not. This isn't this reality, but I'm still at the point where there are objective things by which because they've made the reality, right? So they've played God. My thoughts still about this water bottle came from outside of me, right? So it's just a thought experiment.
Just in the fact that a reality exists at all.
Yeah.
Sufficient.
Yeah.
And it's
I mean-
not possible for reality. Like, if this is a simulation, since we're using
You look like your mind has been blown. Like you're scaring me.
since we're using ideas, it couldn't be possible that other first principles exist outside the simulation.
Right, because why do I even like water, even if the water's not real? There has to be something objective about water that makes me like it. What is it? Like, what is it about hummus that, like, that's outside of Kevin? Like, however he experienced it, his idea of it is not what satisfies him. Right? It's whatever the experience of it is. Right?
I mean, I don't know. I think the Matrix thought experiment is kind of dumb, but like, if you were to take it seriously, the person would just say, "Oh, well, you only are satisfied by water because that's what the computers program you to feel."
Yeah,
But
that's still outside of me. It still came from outside of me. That's the point, right?
And in a sense, that's
So reality is still outside of me, not on my own ideas.
that's still not that different from reality where we're not in the Matrix, where you like water because that's the way reality is set up. Yeah,
The programmer has programmed it that way.
exactly. Like,
To your point, yeah, I think I now know what getting high is like. This conversation.
oh no.
All right, we're going to move on.
Yeah.
All right. So we've now talked about what it's not. Let's talk about what it is. Okay. So let's talk about how we come to know things. All right. All right. So this is sort of our launching point. Remember, going back to the very beginning of this conversation, where we took the fourth point of the basic human goods, and we said that the fourth was highest. This is where St. Thomas would agree, even though it doesn't say it explicitly. Said the act that is most appropriate to man, most natural to him, is to know. All right. So what I want to talk about is, for just a second, I want us to begin to think about what knowledge is. Yes.
In a general sense, or in the gift of the Holy Spirit sense?
In a natural sense. So what is knowledge? St. Thomas is answering the question in that quote, but what does that mean?
It's kind of like to sort of swallow or imbibe, to some extent, the forms that are
Okay.
out there.
So when we... that's a start. When we swallow and imbibe something, what happens to it?
I mean, I guess I'm just going off what you said before, but it becomes a part of you. So.
Yeah, so what is knowledge then? The wedding between the knower, and the thing that's known. Right? So that when you know something, it becomes a part of you. Right? I think we've talked about this before. Right? Why does the Bible talk about when a husband and a wife get together? Why does it call it knowledge? Why does it say Adam knew his wife? Why? Because the lover and the thing loved became one, right? So knowledge is the knower and the thing known becoming one thing, right? You can't unknow something, right? You can't, once you know it, it's a part of you, right? You could forget it, but you can't unknow it, right? There's no divorce.
What is the distinction between forgetting and unknowing?
Well, so if you know something, right, and you can't access it through your memory, you still know it, right? Because if someone reminded you of it, or, for example, I might ask you something that you're going to get a test on tomorrow.
I have a test tomorrow.
Okay. I might ask you something, and you're like, I don't know. And I hand you your notebook, and you open a page, and there's a sentence there that triggers your memory, and now you can answer the question. Even though it didn't really, it wasn't the question directly, all of a sudden it helps you recall the knowledge that you have of that thing. Right, so your notes would never be comprehensive enough to tell me the answer to the question.
But sometimes that's not the case, right? So, like, if, for example, someone today reminded me of a conversation we had last year, and I was like,
Do you remember?
I just had no idea it ever happened. And so it's like, or like when you completely forget a human being, and they're like, hey, good to see you.
But do we say I didn't know that or I forgot that?
Well,
But can you really? But you're saying there's no unknowing. But could you say you really knew something? if you're, or that you still know something if you've completely forgotten it and nothing's.
Yeah, well,
I mean, you're re-knowing it.
Let's come back to what you just said, because when I'm going to get to that diagram again, how you know something, and I think your example actually will make sense. We can talk about how you forget something.
There's also a chance my mind is just broken at this point. So
Yeah. All right. So what I want us to understand then, the thing known is in the knower. That when we know something, we abstract the form of it. And what is the form? You guys remember what form is? The essence of a thing. What it is. It's whatness. So when I get to know the chair, you guys want the chair's back. That the form of a chair is in me. Okay. Just not the same as it's in that chair, but I now know the chair. The chair is a part of me. All right. And we'll talk about what that means in just a second. All right. So remember, man is a rational animal. Irrationality is the highest thing. That's the first part. And then the second is this idea that maybe this will help a little bit, because I know I said this maybe 2 times ago, and it may not have clicked. Where does that principle, the thing known is in the knower according to the mode of the knower, where does that most obvious? How about heaven? What is the thing known? God as He is. And what is that? What is the beatific vision? The perfect union between the knower and the known. Right? So remember, like, our happiness consists in knowing God. And in heaven we'll know Him as He is. And so that's why St. Thomas says that he sort of takes the natural and shows how supernaturally, how we are ultimately happy because of that.
So in heaven we won't know God completely. So where do you draw the line between to know and to know partially, to know and to comprehend? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so we will apprehend. He can't be comprehended, right? Because only He can comprehend Himself. And His comprehension of Himself is the second person of the Trinity, right? We will apprehend Him to the degree that we're filled with sanctifying grace. Like, the holier you are now, the better you'll know God then, face to face. Right? And how do we know Him now?
veiled.
Veiled by what?
This mortal coil.
Well, so we know Him by faith, right? And what is faith?
Something of things not seen.
So faith is God's share to us in this life of His knowledge of Himself. Right? Everybody grasp that? That's really important. So faith isn't just trusting God. You should trust Him because He's trustworthy. But faith ultimately is a share in God's knowledge of Himself. Okay. All right. All right, so we already talked about, let's talk a little bit about the human machine for knowing. So Thomas says there are 3 grades of cognitive power. For one cognitive power, namely the sense, is the act of a bodily organ. So he's saying there's this thing called sense knowledge, which we'll talk about in a second, and that comes in and through the body. There's another grade of cognitive power, which is in no way connected with matter, such as the angelic intellect, or such is the angelic intellect. All right, so angels know forms innately. So God, at their creation, infused the forms into their minds, and they know forms, and because they know the universal, they then know all particular things with it. Yes, Casey?
This is a question someone asked me earlier, and it kind of popped up. They get all their knowledge infused at once, right? So
Yes.
like your guardian angel knows everything that's going to happen to you.
No. So
They
they do not know free will decisions.
Okay.
So angels can still learn, but
Okay.
they don't learn by experience. They learn by being told.
Okay.
They
Right.
extrapolate into the future, and they're like, we can see potentially.
Yeah, because they know you, but they can't predict perfectly what you're going to do.
Cool.
You say they learn by being told, not by experience.
Yeah. So any new sort of ideas unrelated to what they're doing is told to them either by a higher angel or by God Himself.
So it's not by watching our actions and what we do.
Well, their knowledge of you is such that they don't learn anything new about you. So they know, they can see like the level of virtue you have and all of that. So it's universalizing to the particular rather than going the other way. So yes, I don't want to get too hung up on this. So
Sorry, thank you.
They know everything about us, but then we change as people, so I'm not the same person I was a year and a half ago.
yeah,
So they knew both how I would be, how I was then, and how I would be now.
yeah, not in the sense of this is like so getting to the personal level is a little difficult to like. Don't think in terms of think of knowledge of the world. Like they don't learn new things, but they're going to learn things about people based on their actions. So they don't learn anything new about trees by studying them. Like angels know everything about trees there is to know, and they know all particular trees because of it. But we can talk about angels sometime. But human activities are a little different because it depends on free will decisions, which they can't see.
I'm still confused because you said they can't learn through observations.
Yeah, so
Really
think about learning things and not, and this is why I don't want you to hang up, things about reality versus learning personal attributes, or they have a very good idea of what you're going to do. They can't predict it perfectly because we're not under. So the reason why they know what a tree is going to do when exactly the leaves are going to fall is because they know the laws. Because they can't see the law that governs free will, they don't know those things. They have to be shown. So either God has to show it to them in advance, or they have to see it when you do it. Okay.
What is seeing that when we do it, we learning through observation?
Not in the way we not experimentally.
Okay.
So because it doesn't give it they can tell sort of what you're going to do, but they still don't know what you're going to do, right? Like if you continually steal and you go into a bank, your angel could go probably going to steal, but couldn't go definitely going to steal.
Yeah.
But do they not know what we do then, eventually?
No,
Never.
because it all depends on free will activity. They do not know your free will choices.
But
Because
will
only
they-
you and God know.
But will they ever know it?
Well, they know
what
the
we
choices.
do.
Yeah, they'll know the choices you made, but not the choices you're going to make.
But after that becomes a made choice, how do they find that out? Is that through observation, or is that they're told?
Yeah, they observe that.
So
I mean,
that part
yeah.
is observed.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
but don't think of that. You wouldn't say I learned about a person by watching them, right? Like they just get to know you, right? Which is very different. That's what I meant about
I get
put
what
the
you're
knowledge part versus the personal part aside. We can certainly
Okay.
talk more about it another time, but
So they would get to know us the same way that I would get to know a new person.
yeah, except they can see from interiorly too. Like they can see,
So interiorly,
like when you might be able to hide that you're angry. They can see you're angry even if you hide it.
so they know our persons because they're told, and they know our actions through observation.
Yes.
In summary.
Can the saints see all that too?
Only if God allows it. Only if God allows it.
So what if you? But you couldn't give that power to them. God would have to you could pray for it or
No, I mean you can reveal to your guardian angel something about yourself, but like I said, they can see you have physiological changes when you experience an emotion, even though you may not show it on the outside. They can see those. Right? They know your temperament because it's bodily. They know all the things. They know how to get you to go down. They can't cause thoughts directly, but they can trigger your imagination to make you think something. Maybe. They can get you thinking in a certain line of thought. All right, so we're not angels, we're not animals, but we have this sort of connection between the two. So I'm going to try to get us moving a little bit. All right, you guys really like this, so I brought it back. Actually, I don't think anybody liked it because of the colors, but all right. So let's talk about
It
how.
looks like someone negated it. Like it used to be a good picture.
Yeah. Well,
Talk
it was
about negative.
probably me that negated it.
Okay.
I think you're right.
But although, dude, I gotta be honest, you're a little negative. I think it's you that negated it.
Wow.
Yeah, you just negated it just now. Just now.
Get out of here, Descartes.
All right. So this thing is presented before us. All right. So I'm going to use Andrew's computer. All right. So this thing is. Are you comfortable with me using your computer? All right. So this thing is presented before our exterior senses. Okay. Not just. Don't think of just sight, but like all 5 of my senses could encounter that computer. Okay, so let's pretend I don't know what it is. All right, and I walk up to it, and Andrew would be really happy if I lick the mouse. So I walk up to this thing. All right, let's pick a different thing. So I have this thing in my hand, X. All right, and I look at it. It's red. It's round, and I hold it in my hand, and it's kind of smooth on the outside. I smell it, and it has kind of a fruity smell to it. I take a bite. It's pleasing to my palate. All right, so all of that is then brought. All 5 senses are giving data to what is called the common sense, which is the first of our interior senses, where we form this perception of it. So we've now immaterialized it. And so with all of that data put together, now the imagination tries to take what's called the percept, the perception data, and form this image of it. Okay? Now the image, going back to whoever said the thing about somebody going to, like when people testify on something. So once we move from the percept to the phantasm, right, to where our imagination begins. So our imagination is not just this picture-taking thing, right? What affects our imagination? Our memory and our experiences, right? And so I may have something in front of me and see it totally different than you did because of my imagination, right? Even though my 5 senses registered all the same things that yours did, but what my imagination gathered from that perception is always going to be different. All right, so I'm back to my thing. Now I have I'm looking interiorly. I have this image of it. It's not a perfect copy of it because I'm now trying to figure out what it is. Okay, and so this image that I have in my imagination of this thing X. Now my intellect begins to operate on the image from my imagination and abstracts all of the all of these sort of individual qualities to it, like its color, its weight, its taste. So it's stripping all of those things off, okay, to try to figure out what it is. All right, so I'm no longer concerned about the individual thing. I'm trying to figure out what it is. All right, and so I'm trying to capture the essence of the form of it, and that happens in our intellect. All right, so we'll not. All right, so that's the steps, okay, and then. So let's talk about the first step. Okay.
So the angels can touch that left side, but not the right side.
Well, the angels, the arrow would go the other way, sort of, in that they would take the nature of the thing and then match it up to the nature of the thing.
Yeah, like how they interact with us.
Yeah. So it's not in the sense of like they don't have senses, like they don't then put it into their senses or anything like that, but they go the other way.
No, he's saying like how like that is us. Angels act on us. By
how angels act on us?
You know,
sorry, yeah. So yes,
angels, you know.
So angels typically, although they may appear to us to our exterior senses, like your guardian angel usually doesn't appear to you, but if he were to, when he does interact with you, he interacts on your imagination and your memory. Okay, so he will implant an image in your imagination. Like maybe if you're going to do something wrong, he puts an unpleasant image in your imagination, so that you'll begin to then your intellect has to abstract from that and go, maybe I shouldn't do this because or he'll pull up a memory, and then obviously the devils can do the same thing, right? Can implant images in our imagination or recall memories, which is a good reason to make sure what goes before our eyes is so pure and purify our memories. All right, so that's how angels interact with us. Sorry, I didn't know what you were asking. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sense knowledge. All right, so that left side. Okay, so the left side is how we know individual things. Just think of it in that way. All right, so how did I know that particular apple? Because it came in and through my senses, right? And is that true knowledge? Yes, right? Do animals have the same knowledge?
They don't abstract.
Okay, what if we just stop on the left side? What if we just stop on the left side? Do animals do that, except for the transfer of the phantasm?
Yeah.
Okay, so a little different, like their memory is a little different, which we'll talk about in a second. but they more or less can do everything on the left side because they have sense knowledge. So animals do know things, right? They don't know universal things, but they know individual things, right? So they know their owner, right? They recognize him, maybe by his scent or by his voice or all of them together, right? So animals know things, but they only know particular things. Okay, so that's what we're going to sort of focus on, this difference between particular and universal. According to this opinion, then, on the part of the phantasms, which remember those are just images in our imagination, intellectual knowledge is caused by the senses. But since the phantasms cannot of themselves affect the passive intellect, required to be made actually intelligible by the active intellect, cannot be said that sensible knowledge is total and perfect cause of intellectual knowledge, but rather that it is in a way the material cause. Okay, what does he say? All right, he's essentially saying that everything we know comes in and through our senses. Okay. All right, which is a very sort of Catholic way of understanding things. All right. So sense knowledge is real knowledge, and so do animals know color? All right, say a higher animal. Does an animal know color? A higher animal know color?
Not in the abstract.
Yeah, so not in the abstract, but he knows that there's something that's red and something that's green. He wouldn't go, okay, red means stop, green means go. But he might know red is a good food for me, green is not.
But you can kind of make him look like he has the intelligence by, giving him treats every time so that, there's some kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so you can train them, right? Although that could be also just an effect of the fall, that when Adam had all the animals domesticated, we can still go back and redomesticate them, right? All right, so here's the question, all right, and this will help us. If the tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? Yeah. And no one hears it. Sorry, you answered my question first. Don't say yeah. If no one hears it, does it make any noise?
Yes.
Yes.
Why? So this is what I want to unpack for a few minutes.
The reality exists whether or not we partake in it. In the sense that
Some things don't require someone to register them.
Yeah, so just because something is sensed doesn't mean that it exists, right? That would be the first one. Yeah, you never knew that that's what I was getting at, right? So that's a way, again, they smuggle idealism in, right? And, I think I shared the story of talking to a guy who said that there was a bomb in the hallway and that as long as he didn't think about it, it would never explode. And he was dead serious.
That doesn't make sense. Like, say you thought you had $1,000 in your wallet, but then you look at it and you actually have 100. That would never make sense. It's like your ideas determine what reality is.
Yeah. Well, again, it's unlivable, right? But it is convenient, right? It's convenient at times. Like if I can dip in and out whenever I feel like it, it's very convenient.
Right. So this guy genuinely thought that if he didn't think about a bomb...
No, he didn't genuinely think that. He was a professor who had taught this forever, and nobody ever challenged him on it. And I asked him, and he couldn't respond. And it was actually pretty bad because he kept arguing with me. Even I put it down. I'm like, "We can talk about this later." But yeah, that's.
Is that here in States? Like somebody here?
No, this person was a dude, but I guarantee you, if you find a philosophy professor at State, you will find an idealist who will say that. Maybe don't make it as drastic as the bomb, but I guarantee you will find a professor who believes that. And we teach it. We teach that things do not exist unless I have an idea of them. Because that's just a consequence of everything we said, right?
Doesn't that dismiss everything you don't understand? Like how carboxylic acids are formed. They're formed specific ways. Now, whether or not I understand them doesn't affect.
Yeah. So that's the point, right? Yeah, that's the point, right? And then maybe they'll concede that, but then they won't concede that that something is objectively wrong, whether you think it's good for you or not, because that's a little easier to deny initially, right?
Cyanide is bad for me because it directly results.
Yeah, because it has the power to kill me.
Yeah.
Right. It in and of itself has the power to kill me, whether I know it or not. Right. Which was the point about the bomb.
Would the person believe that if you knew that a bomb was somewhere but no one else did,
Then I would just
With
explode
with
the
the
speed of
bomb,
light.
but like you're out of the blast radius, would those people actually die?
Uh,
They weren't aware of
I
the
don't
bomb?
see. You're asking me to put on the mindset of somebody who honestly that's the definition of insanity to me. So I don't know. I don't know what they would think, because regardless of what they would think, it wouldn't actually happen that way, and they know it.
It's
So
not
they,
reality.
if it blew up, they would run. Right?
I think, so what about, I don't know if this is kind of off topic, and I don't know if this is really like an issue today, but like solipsism. And like my rough understanding of that is like, what's behind me, I can't see it, so it doesn't exist. Only what I sense in the external world is what exists.
Yeah.
Like,
That's just an extreme form of this.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So the point is, like, I don't want to set up straw men and you guys go, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, think, and you will encounter this. I promise. And now the mask, like John Claude said, he's like, oh wait, that's what they're asking when they ask the thing about the tree.
So annoying. I got asked that when I was like 4.
Yeah, like you will find this everywhere.
So how would you start off with it? So let's say we meet this professor in class tomorrow, and we have to start at like step 1, going all the way to the end. How would you start off the conversation?
Yeah. So if I, well, it depends on what I heard, but I would ask, what do you think is real? That would be where I would start.
That would be the first question
Yeah.
I'd ask.
What do you think is real? Like I would definitely Socratically do it, especially if I was a student and not a. Yes.
When it comes to the tree, I feel like the way people normally approach it, or at least the way I've approached it here, would be the whole like, when it moves, it disturbs air molecules and it sends vibrations throughout the air, and so like that's what noise is, whether or not our eardrum is there to interact with the.
Yeah, that's the answer, right?
That's like, is that the answer you give, or would you give it?
There's nothing wrong with that answer, right? Like I mean, it makes noise. If you want to explain how it makes noise, and get your science geek on.
Okay, but like, so like you wouldn't feel the need to approach it from a philosophical perspective.
No, like this. Remember, we're talking about foundational stuff, but like if you kind of got to avoid philosophical language because people don't understand. Like it's not a francolingua. Like
yeah, but I guess like you could use that because like my thing is like most people, like I was kind of saying, accept science. So like if you were to try and make
so if someone did the tree thing with me, I would ask, okay, what if you're 100 feet away and you barely hear it? And then, are you saying it was only that loud? And then and I go, well, what if I moved 150 feet away? And it was, well, you're saying a tree only makes that much sound when it falls. So always get them to the point where they're realizing I can't do this, right? Like.
I think what we're getting distracted by is like the tree example and the bomb example are very extreme results.
Oh, the tree I don't think is. People do that a lot, right? Like I'm sure you've all heard that as a thought experiment. But the bomb example is extreme.
Actually, yes. Okay.
Yeah, have you ever heard that?
No,
Or
I've
very-
never heard
someone
of
trying to
trying
make
to
it
tell
the other way.
But they'll ask it, but never give you an answer, right? Like, have you ever had someone give you an answer to that?
Yeah,
Really? And said, good for you. Like, they've said
I'm
to
an
you.
engineer, so I guess that
Yeah.
also is like.
I've had people go, you can't know.
Yeah, that's usually the skepticism.
I've never.
See, what she just said is the skepticism. You can't know, which is we're back to Descartes, right? If nobody's there to measure, you can't know.
But also just like
Or they just live in Tommy circles.
just inherently, someone gets hazy like when you apply to like questions of morality and such because it's not as obvious as something like, or as obvious to us as the tree of law.
Which is why I think it's important to be able to transfer one to the other, because I think in our age of scientism, you're going to have a lot of people assent to science, and so when you need to say objective truth is not only objective science, but you can think outside of it.
Well, what a lot of people counter is they're like, oh, science we don't know for certain. Science changes. We used to think that the Earth was flat.
But do you?
Now
And
we
I
know
guess
that
Then
it's round.
they'll
I mean,
go around
the
and
science
say
doesn't
that
change
flat
our
earthers are really idiots. So then
Well, so yeah,
I'm just the messenger.
so that requires, though, to JT's point, that requires understanding the difference between induction and deduction, right? Like all science is induction,
yeah,
where you argue from a
yeah,
particular to a universal, right?
Though-
And you can only do it probabilistically,
yeah. I feel like most
whereas
people today
deductive
think that-
goes from universal to particular. And everyone's really good at the inductive, not so good at the deductive.
But what about, so I had this experience as a freshman, like going to Ireland for the first time, and I was kind of like, I was almost like when I get on this plane and I get over there, is it really going to be there? Because like I've seen maps, I've seen pictures, but it's like, is it actually going to be there? And it's like, do I know for sure? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like what if it's not refreshing fast enough or something? Like,
I mean, like, how much
Frame rate drops out.
what if only a few of the pixels are there? No, like, but that's the logical conclusion of this, right? It's like when you actually, nobody thinks that way. Nobody thinks about like, do I need to call ahead? Do I need
Make
to
sure Ireland is there.
Yeah.
I've never seen it before.
Stay on the phone so I know you exist.
Yeah.
Oh my
You
God.
don't hang up first.
All right, we talked about this before. We got really off track and really behind, so let's try to fly through some of
If you have mass,
We never got off track behind.
Nothing is in the intellect, which was not in the first in the senses. What do you guys agree with that?
yes.
Yeah.
Well, other than, I guess, infused knowledge through faith. Right?
Okay.
Isn't that an example of things?
Yes. So
Okay.
God can infuse knowledge into.
Okay.
But then it's also important, like talking about that, like you're talking about first principles coming through observation. So it's not like I only know the blanket. It's I know my dad is my dad, and you're not my dad. So you can get the abstractions, but it did come from sense.
Yeah. So let's go back to John Claude's example for a second about God speaking to us, or giving us. Did that knowledge come through our senses?
The imaginative sense, maybe?
Yeah, so remember, we talked about, going back to this, how many senses do we have? 9, right? So can we think without using our imagination? Like, guess what? Like, that's biblical inspiration. Why does it sound the way it does? Because God infused the message and it gets filtered through the hearer's imagination, right? And that's why we have to understand what their patterns of thought were and understand language they use and everything else, right? So yes.
I have something early for that one. What, other than the 5 physical senses, what are the other senses?
Yeah, so it would be the ones that are so clearly written on the thing in really dark yellow against a purple background. So the common sense is where all the 5 senses come together.
Okay.
And then what's called your imagination, your memory, and your cogitative power. Your cogitative power, which we haven't talked about, is just your initial sort of apprehension of the situation. Like, if I saw a lion come through the door, I wouldn't go, furry, tail, abstract, lion. I would go, danger, and run. Right? And that's the cogitative sense, right? Like we would just get out, right? So there's no reasoning that goes on when that's why we jump when someone grabs us, right? I didn't think about it and then jump. So the other senses are then
So your imagination.
the common sense, imagination, memory, and the reason why we call them senses is they're called sensibles is because they depend on the body, right? And where the intellectual powers don't depend on the body per se, except that they do depend on the imagination in order to reason. All right. So what I want to do, because I can't hang like normal, so I want to back up here. Hold on. Let me see if I'm trying to figure out a good way to summarize. Ooh, here we go.
Oh, no.
This will allow us to summarize all those other slides. All right. All right. All right. So St. Thomas asked the question: what happens when the soul separates from the body? Do we know anything? All right. Can we know anything? Who says yes? We still know stuff.
Well, I said no 2 weeks ago and I was wrong.
Okay. All right. So everyone agrees that we do know something, right? We're not just whatever. But how we know is what we're going to talk about. All right. All right. So it says the soul, therefore, when united to the body, consistently with the mode of existence, has a mode of understanding by turning to corporeal phantasms. What does he mean by that? So I say to each of you, God. Do you have an image of God right now?
Yeah, there's something going on in the matter.
Yeah, so look, see, Casey's got, maybe it's an old man with a long white beard. I can't say God and you not have an image of imagination. Everyone agree? right? And even if when I was talking about the apple, right? I just said apple. Do you have an apple in your imagination right now? Right? If I say don't think about the apple, do you still have an apple in your imagination?
An elephant.
Yeah. So you can't not think without images in your imagination. So it can go the other way, right? It can go the other way. Remember we talked about mindfulness. We said the problem with it is you're trying to control your imagination without using your intellect, which is the thing that can control your imagination. So that's all he's saying. He's saying, okay, when we think in this state where we are now, it requires the body. All right, it requires that we draw up images and use our memory. All right, by turning to corporeal phantasms, which are incorporeal organs. So it's saying that it's a bodily function. But when it's separated from the body, okay, so it has a mode of understanding by turning to simply intelligible objects as is proper to other separate substances. All right, so what is he saying? But when it is separated from the body, it has a mode of understanding by turning to simple intelligible objects as is proper to other separate substances. So what are separate substances he's talking about? Angels. And how do angels know? By knowing universals. All right. So we won't suddenly get to heaven and forget everything. All right. It's because remember we said the form, the thing known, is in the knower. It's there permanently. I may not be able to access it because the trigger inside of me, because now to answer your question, the trigger inside of me to remember that thing has been damaged in some way. Or in that case, I don't have it because I no longer have the corporeal powers of the body that enable me to access that memory, right? So when people have Alzheimer's, same thing happens, right? So they still have all of those forms in their soul. So they still have raw material in which to think and reason, right? But they don't have the ability to think and reason. Why? Because they don't. Go ahead.
I think their brain atrophies and literally tricks.
Yeah, because they don't have the corporeal powers, right? They don't have whatever it is. We don't know necessarily like what parts of the brain, or if it's all the brain, the imagination, because it's an immaterial power that's linked to some organ, some part of the brain. We don't know exactly what it is. But we will know in heaven. We will know in heaven by turning to simply intelligible objects as is proper to other separate substances. Hence, it is as natural for the soul to understand by turning to the phantasms as it is for it not to be joined to the body. But to be separated from the body is not in accordance with its nature, and likewise to understand without turning to the phantasms is not natural to it. All right, so what is he saying? So what we just said. He's saying if you don't have your imagination, you can't reason in a natural way. All right, and so in heaven, how do we reason? He says the separated soul does not understand by way of innate species, nor by species abstracted then, nor only by species retained. All right, so innate species are just things that have been infused to us, nor by species abstracted, so we don't look at individual things and abstract any longer, nor only by species retained. Remember I said the form is in the body. Only by species retained, and this the objection proves, but the soul in that state understands by means of participated species arising from the influence of divine light. So you see all things in God, and you see them as God sees them. Okay? So this idea of participation, the reason why I went to this is because next time we meet, we'll talk about this when we talk about metaphysics, what participation is. And so he says, hence, as soon as it ceases to act by using the imagination, the soul turns at once to superior things. Nor is this way of knowledge unnatural, for God is the author of the influx of both the light of grace and the light of nature. Okay, so he's saying it's not we have the capacity to do this because we can still reason without the body. This is our proof for the immortality of soul. But when we no longer have individual things, the light of reason turns the other way, right? Turns to God. All right. So we're no longer looking for God in the individual things. We're now looking to God as He really is. All right. That's what he's saying. All right. And he's saying it's not unnatural, but it's supernatural. Okay. So God gives us this power to do this. All right. All right. So I've got like 5 minutes. Let's just back up real quick to here. All right, I know you guys have asked me that question a lot, and I've sort of just skirted away from the question, but you can still reason in heaven, but it's reason by divine light, okay, from the image of God. It's participation in God's reasoning. Okay. All right.
And is that different from the reasoning that'll happen after the resurrection? Because at that point you will have your body. Right?
Yeah, no, it's no different.
Okay.
Right. So St. Thomas says that the body doesn't add to our beatitude. It just, so it's a subtle, he says, it doesn't add to our beatitude, like it doesn't suddenly get better when we have the body, but there's more, we experience it more deeply. Though,
Isn't that bad?
yeah, well, no, because like it's not like we know God any better. So that's his point, right? Like he says, you, because you're fully now participating, you participate more, but it's not like suddenly now that you have your senses, you get more of God. So in other words, the joy spills over into your body. All right, everyone know what, if I use the term universal, what that means? So universals are just the natures themselves. Okay. This is what I want to spend the last few minutes on, is the acts of the mind. Right. So we're back here on the right side, how I come to know something. All right. So the three acts are simple apprehension, judgment, and reasoning. So let's talk about simple apprehension. So going back to my thing, the abstract, the color, the taste, all that's been abstracted, and now just the form remains for my intellect, and I develop an idea of it. Okay? And as soon as I develop an idea of it, my intellect immediately judges whether it's true. Okay? So immediately, as soon as you apprehend something, the intellect says, that's true. All right, that thing exists. So going back to the unicorn example, I can get an idea of a unicorn, but then my judgment would be, that's not real. Doesn't mean I can't think about it, but I'm going to say that's not in reality. Okay? So simple apprehension is an act of the intellect whereby we grasp the nature of things through the medium of ideas. So this is where we develop our ideas, and ideas are what? The things we know, or the means by which we know them? Which one?
Means by which we know.
Everyone shake their head, right? The means by which we know them. Like they're not the things we know. All right. So our ideas then are what are called formal signs. They're attached to the thing. They don't exist without the thing in reality. Okay. So in other words, you think about what I talked about how the ideas can't just sudden. I can't have ideas. If Casey never had the experiences, any of those experiences, he'd never have the idea of what a contradiction is and what a contradiction is not. Okay. So they're always attached to the thing outside.
But it's not like it's destroyed. I mean, it's just the thing comes first, and then the idea comes second.
Yes. Yeah. Remember that which is in the intellect must first have been in the senses, and not just the exterior senses. Second act of the mind is judgment. Is the act which man understands something to exist or affirms being. So I can go back to unicorns and I can judge that thing doesn't exist in the real world, doesn't have any being, but I can still then turn to the next step, which is then reason about it. Okay? And I suppose I was writing a story. Right? And reasoning is the third. Knowledge is developed and organized through a reasoned intellectual discourse according to the rules of logic. Right? So I begin the train of thought, right? Where I now have an idea, and I have remember, idea is just connecting of two things, right? Like the cat is black, so there's a lot being said there, right? Like saying the cat exists, black exists, and I'm saying those two things go together. That's my idea. All right, and then judgment would say the cat is black, true, and now I could then take that idea and begin a train of reasoning, right? Well, they're all cats black. Whose cat is it? Like, you begin to then, whatever angle you're sort of coming at it, okay? And you form sort of, almost think of like, you form intellectual syllogisms. That's how we think. That's why logic is taught the way it's taught. It's not just to drive us nuts. All right, questions? Because I have like 3 minutes. And I went through like 30 minutes of slides in 5 minutes. It's better that way when I skip. Yes, Casey.
So, heaven, no body. resurrection of the body. What does the body do? Because I assume we're not sleeping, we're not eating, we're not doing the things we do now with our body. So, but we just have a body.
What does your body do now when you're praying? Is it just pulling you down, or does it actually participate?
Participates.
Yeah. So don't think of the body as pulling us down, right? Like think of it like.
Sure, but so the only function of the body will be lifting us up.
Well, the function of the body would be the fact that you are your body. So whatever the function of Casey is, and for us to exist without a body is unnatural, completely totally unnatural. Right? And the only reason why we are still, in the sense, active during that time when we don't have the body is by some miraculous intervention of God, whatever that is, right? Whether it be participating in the humanity of Christ, whatever it is. But don't think in terms of separation. It should be that way. And you without your body is don't let it go to your head, but it's hideous. It's not.
Me with my body's not all.
Yeah, it's not just you without. It's not just you. It's all of us. That's an unnatural thing.
So from all eternity, God knew we were gonna, fall, and so we'd have to die, and then He kind of packed this in the ability to survive without the body. We can get it back later.
I guess I can't answer that question. Maybe. I guess you just got to be careful about thinking Plan B type thinking of God. But other than that, yeah, sure, that's exactly. It was in our best interest to spend some time away from the body or whatever. We may not know what the reason was, but there is a reason.